The unexpected encounter, the wind howled through the trees as Jack moved quietly through the dense forest, his boots crunching on the dry ground. His ship had crashed, leaving him stranded on this strange alien world, far from Earth. His equipment was broken, and his hope was fading with every passing hour. The only thing Jack had left was his survival instinct, but even that felt weak as he moved further into the unknown. The sky was turning a deep shade of purple as the sun began to set. Jack had been walking for hours, searching for any signs of life, any way to fix his ship. But so far, he had found nothing but the eerie silence of the planet's wilds. Suddenly, his ears picked up a faint sound cries, muffled but unmistakable. He stopped dead in his tracks and listened carefully. The cries were coming from somewhere ahead of him, just beyond a cluster of large trees. With his heart racing, Jack moved quickly, crouching low to avoid making any noise. The cries grew louder as he approached, and he realized they were the sounds of a child, scared and in pain. He pushed through the trees and into a small clearing, where he saw something that made his blood run cold. An alien woman knelt on the ground, her body shaking with sobs. She was clutching to small children, their faces pale and terrified. Her alien features were unlike anything Jack had ever seen before long. Slender limbs, large dark eyes, and skin that seemed to shimmer in the fading light. She was clearly not from Earth, but her distress was undeniable. She was alone in the wilderness, with no one to help her or her children. Jack froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. He had heard about the alien races in this part of the galaxy, but he had never encountered one firsthand. The woman didn't seem to notice him at first, too focused on the children in her arms. The smaller of the two, a boy, was crying loudly, his small body trembling in the woman's arms. The other, a girl, was quieter, her wide eyes fixed on the stranger standing before them. The woman's head snapped up, and her eyes met Jack's. For a moment, neither of them moved. Jack could see the fear in her eyes, but there was also something else: desperation. She was looking at him as though he was her only hope. "Please," she said, her voice soft but filled with emotion. "Help us." Jack's mind raced. Had nothing to give. No weapons, no supplies. He had no idea what had happened to these people, or how he could possibly help them. But there was something in her gaze, a silent plea for help that tugged at his heart. He took a cautious step forward. "I don't know how I can help," he said, his voice low and uncertain. "I'm just one man, and I don't know this planet. I don't have anything left." The woman's eyes filled with tears. She held the children closer, as if trying to shield them from the reality of their situation. "We have nothing," she whispered. "Our home, our people, they're gone. The invaders, they took everything. My husband." Her voice faltered, and she looked down at the children in her arms. "He's gone. I couldn't protect them." Jack's heart tightened. He had seen devastation before on battlefields, in the wreckage of war, but something about the alien woman's sorrow felt different. It wasn't just the loss of a loved one. It was the loss of everything. The loss of a home, a future, and the unbearable weight of trying to protect her children in a world that seemed to have forgotten them. The boy's cries softened as the woman gently rocked him in her arms. The girl looked up at Jack, her eyes full of fear and confusion. Jack could see the bond between the children and their mother. Despite everything, she was still trying to protect them, trying to keep them safe. "Please," the woman said again, her voice trembling. "Take us with you. We have nowhere else to go." Jack's mind raced as he processed her words. What could he do? He was stranded on a foreign planet, with no way to fix his ship or contact anyone. He had nothing to offer her. And yet, as he looked at the woman and then at the small, innocent faces of her children, Something inside him shifted. He couldn't leave them here to die. "I don't know if I can," Jack said, his voice rough. "But I'll try. We'll figure something out. We'll survive this together." The woman's face softened with relief. She nodded, though the exhaustion in her eyes was still evident. She had no other choice. And Jack had just made a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. As Jack knelt down beside her, the wind picked up again, howling through the trees. The alien world felt colder, more hostile than ever, but in that moment, Jack knew one thing for sure. He couldn't leave them behind. Whatever this world had in store for him, he would face it head-on. With them by his side. The alien widow nodded silently. Her children still clutched tightly in her arms. Jack looked at them, knowing that his life had just taken an unexpected turn. They were no longer strangers to him. They were his responsibility now, and with that thought, Jack stood up, offering a hand to the alien woman. Together, they would face whatever dangers this planet held. Together, they would survive. Asterisk. The plea for help Jack had never felt more out of place. Standing in the shadow of alien trees, the sound of the wind whistling through the branches, and the soft, steady cries of the child in the woman's arms made him feel like an intruder. In an unfamiliar world, he had faced enemies before, fought in battles across galaxies, but none of that seemed to matter now. None of it prepared him for this. The alien widow's desperate eyes were locked on his, waiting for him to make a decision. "We have nothing left," she repeated softly, her voice filled with a mix of grief and fear. "Please, help us." Jack's thoughts raced. There was nothing to offer her. He had no shelter, no food, no way to contact anyone. His ship was beyond repair, and the reality of his situation was sinking in. He was as stranded as she was. Yet, somehow, her pain cut through the walls he had built up over the years. The pleading look in her eyes, the innocent faces of her children, had triggered something in him he hadn't expected. A sense of duty. He glanced at the children, her small son still crying quietly, his face streaked with dirt and tears, and the little girl clinging to her mother, watching him with wide, uncertain eyes. He had nothing to offer them, but their faces held a quiet strength that reminded him of the days when he had a family of his own. I don't know if I can do much," Jack muttered, feeling the weight of the situation press down on him. "I'm stranded here too, but you're not alone. We'll figure this out together, I promise." The alien woman's gaze softened, and she finally relaxed her grip on her children, though her relief was fleeting. "You don't understand," she whispered. "The invaders, they wiped out my people, ... They destroyed everything. We have nowhere to go." She looked down at the children, her voice cracking. "They're all I have left. I'll do anything to protect them." Jack felt his chest tighten as he watched her. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the pain of loss that seemed to radiate from her. She wasn't asking for pity. She wasn't even asking for help. She was simply asking for a chance to survive, to protect the only family she had left. "I understand more than you think," Jack replied softly, his hand instinctively reaching out to help the woman to her feet. "We'll stick together. Whatever happens, you won't have to face it alone." She hesitated for a moment, searching his face, then nodded slowly. "Thank you." Jack took a deep breath. The words, "we'll figure it out," didn't feel as reassuring as he had hoped. He had no plan, no resources. But for the first time since his crash, Jack knew one thing. He couldn't leave her. He couldn't leave them. The alien woman's eyes lingered on his for a moment longer before she turned away, her focus returning to her children. "I don't know where we can go," she said, the fear creeping back into her voice. "But I know of a place, a settlement. It's dangerous, but it's the only hope we have left." The wind picked up again, rustling the leaves overhead as Jack looked at the small family before him. He had no idea what they were running from or how dangerous the journey ahead would be. The thought of venturing deeper into unknown territory, with no allies and no clear destination, filled him with uncertainty. But there was something in her voice, something in her determination, that made him believe they could survive this. "Lead the way," Jack said, his voice steady, though inside, uncertainty gnawed at him. "We'll get there. We have to." The alien widow gave a small, relieved nod and slowly stood up, carefully holding her children. As she moved, Jack followed, closely behind, feeling the weight of their situation press on him. Every step forward felt like walking into the unknown. But there was no turning back now. They had no choice but to keep moving forward. As the small group began to walk, Jack couldn't help but notice the contrast between the alien woman's grace and the harsh reality surrounding them. She moved with the quiet strength of someone who had already lost everything but still had the will to keep going. Her children, exhausted from the journey, were now silent, clinging to her as they walked. Jack's thoughts were consumed by what they had left behind and what lay ahead. He hadn't come to this world to help anyone. He was just trying to survive. Yet, in that moment, with the alien widow by his side, the children clutched in her arms, something had changed in him. He had no answers, no plans, and no idea where this journey would take them. But he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't walk away now. And so, they continued, their footsteps echoing in the quiet alien landscape. Jack didn't know where the path would lead, but the bond between them had already been forged. They were no longer strangers. They were a team, no matter how uncertain the road ahead may be. A choice to make. A tear felt heavier as they moved deeper into the alien forest. The canopy above, thick and unwelcoming. Jack's steps were slow and measured, his mind running through the possibilities of what lay ahead. Each moment spent in this strange world seemed to take him further from the safety and familiarity of Earth. He didn't know if he'd ever make it home, but one thing was certain. His life wasn't just his own anymore. As the alien widow led the way, her children walking in silence behind her, Jack couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they were being watched. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, a primal instinct telling him to be alert. He scanned their surroundings, but the only movement was the wind rustling the leaves. Still, there was an unsettling sense of being hunted, a feeling that deepened with every step. "Where are we going?" Jack finally asked, his voice low. The quiet had been gnawing at him, and he needed something to anchor him, a sense of direction. A goal. The alien widow didn't answer right away. Her eyes focused ahead as she moved through the dense underbrush. After a few moments, she spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "To a settlement," she said. "It's a place where survivors gather, but it's dangerous. The invaders don't care who they destroy." Jack's thoughts raced. The word invaders echoed in his mind. Who were they? What did they want? He had no idea what kind of enemy they were dealing with, but he knew one thing. The widow's fear was real. The raw emotion in her eyes told him that whatever had happened to her people, it had destroyed everything she loved. Her world had been shattered. And now she had nothing but the hope that they could survive long enough to find safety. They moved on in silence for hours, Jack's thoughts turning over and over in his mind. It wasn't just the danger of this unknown world that troubled him. It was the weight of the choice he had made when he decided to help them. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't trained for this kind of survival. His skills were meant for combat, for strategy, for leading men into battle. Those was different. There was no mission, no orders, no clear enemy to fight. There was only survival. "I don't even know your name," Jack said, his voice breaking the quiet. "I've been calling you the widow, but you're more than that. I need to know who you are. What's your name?" The woman glanced back at him, her eyes filled with sorrow and something else, something Jack couldn't quite place. "My name is Alira," she said softly, "and this is Kale, my son." She nodded toward the boy who had fallen asleep on her shoulder, exhausted from their long journey. "And this is Lyra," she continued, her gaze softening as she looked down at the little girl clinging to her side. Jack nodded, taking in the names with a sense of finality. They weren't just people he was helping. They were now a part of his life, tied to him by something stronger than chance. He hadn't asked for this responsibility, but it was clear that he couldn't turn back now. Lyra and her children were his burden to bear, whether he was ready for it or not. "I'm Jack," he said simply, though the introduction felt hollow. It wasn't enough. He didn't know what else to say. The weight of his own name felt insignificant compared to the task before him. They continued on in silence for a while, each of them lost in their own thoughts, until Lyra spoke again, her voice trembling slightly. "I never thought I'd have to ask someone for help," she said, her words heavy with guilt. "I was supposed to protect them, supposed to be strong, but I couldn't save my people. Now I'm asking you to save us." Jack felt a pang of guilt. He didn't know what it meant to lose everything. He'd lost friends, lost battles, but not like this. Not in the way that Lyra had. She was asking him to do something he wasn't sure he could do. But as he looked at her, the weight of her grief, the intensity of her desperation, he realized that he couldn't walk away. Not now. Not after everything she had lost. "You don't have to apologize," Jack said, his voice low but steady. "You're doing the best you can. That's all anyone can do. We'll get through this, together." Lyra looked at him, a hint of relief in her eyes. "I hope you're right," she whispered, "because I don't know what else we can do." They continued onward, the distance between them and the unknown settlement growing smaller. The more Jack thought about it, the more the situation seemed like a gamble. They were walking toward a place of refuge, but how could they trust it? How could they trust anyone in a world where everything had been shattered by war? The enemy wasn't just a force of nature. It was a reminder of the fragility of life in the galaxy, how quickly everything could fall apart, leaving only dust and broken people in its wake. Jack didn't know what lay ahead, but there was one thing he was sure of. If they were going to survive, they had to rely on each other. There was no other choice. The long journey ahead, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the alien landscape. The air had grown colder, and Jack could feel the weight of the journey pressing down on him. His legs ached from the long hours of walking, but the exhaustion was nothing compared to the uncertainty that gnawed at him. They had no clear plan, no safe destination. They were simply moving forward, hoping the next step would lead them to something better. As Lyra led the way through the thick underbrush, Jack's mind raced. He couldn't stop thinking about the invaders she had mentioned, the ones who had destroyed her world. Who were they? What did they want? And why had they left this planet in ruins? It was hard to imagine what kind of enemy could wipe out an entire civilization, leaving nothing but fear and ashes in their wake. Jack glanced back at the children. Kale, still asleep on Lyra's shoulder, looked peaceful, but the little girl, Lyra, was awake, her large, curious eyes darting around as she took in the strange world around her. She was quiet, but Jack could see the weight of the world on her small shoulders. The loss of her home, her people, was written all over her face. Lyra's pace slowed, and Jack caught up with her. "How much further?" he asked, his voice low. The question had been on his mind for hours. His body was sore, and he wasn't sure how much more he could keep up. But it wasn't the physical strain that was worrying him. It was the growing sense of danger that followed them like a shadow. "We're close," Lyra said quietly, her eyes scanning the trees around them. "But we must be careful. The invaders are relentless. They leave nothing behind." Jack couldn't imagine the kind of fear Elira was living with. She had lost everything: her people, her home, her family. And now she was relying on him to keep her and her children safe. It wasn't just the physical danger that weighed on him, was the responsibility. It felt heavy, and with every passing minute he realized how little he knew about the world they were in and how much he had to learn if they were going to survive. The path ahead grew more rugged as they moved deeper into the wilderness. The trees towered above them, their leaves thick and tangled, blocking out most of the light. The sound of distant animal calls echoed through the forest, but there was no sign of other travelers. The settlement Elira spoke of seemed like a distant hope, but Jack wasn't sure if it was a safe haven or a trap. He needed answers, but it was clear that he was walking into the unknown with no map, no guide. "What do we do if we don't find it?" Usk asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He wasn't sure if Elira had heard him at first, but she turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "We keep going," she said simply, her voice resolute. "No matter what, we keep going." Jack nodded, though the uncertainty in his chest didn't go away. Every step they took felt like a step further into a world he didn't understand. He wasn't a soldier anymore, and yet here he was, caught in a struggle that seemed far beyond his training. There were no enemies to fight, no clear path to victory. There was just survival. The sound of movement broke the silence, and Jack's senses went on high alert. Elira immediately stiffened, her hand instinctively reaching for the small blade at her side. Jack's hand went to his own weapon, the one he had kept hidden beneath his jacket. He had no idea what they were facing. But the tension in the air was unmistakable. Something was watching them. The rustling came again, this time closer. Jack's grip tightened on his weapon as Elira moved silently, her body tense, her eyes scanning every shadow. Lyra let out a small gasp, and Elira immediately knelt beside her, pulling the child closer to her side. Jack's heart raced. They couldn't afford to be caught off guard. Not here, not now. Suddenly, the movement stopped. The forest went deathly quiet. For a moment, it felt like time itself had frozen. Jack strained his ears, but all he could hear was the beating of his own heart. Whatever it was waiting. Elira's voice broke the silence, her words a command. "Stay close." Jack didn't hesitate. He moved to her side, positioning himself between Elira and the children. He wasn't sure what kind of danger they were facing, but he knew one thing: he wasn't going to let anything happen to them. They had already lost so much, and he wasn't about to let them lose everything else. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. It was hard to tell. Jack's muscles ached, but he kept his focus, waiting for the slightest sign of movement. His eyes never left the shadows, his mind racing through the possibilities. Were they being hunted, or was it just an animal, a predator of the planet? Elira's steady breathing beside him was the only thing keeping him grounded. Finally, the tension lifted. Elira stood up slowly, her eyes scanning the forest one last time. "We're safe for now," she said, her voice soft but firm. Jack let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The moment had passed, but the unease lingered. Something wasn't right about this place. The silence, the constant feeling of being watched, it wasn't normal. Elira started moving again, her pace unwavering. Jack followed, though his mind was still racing. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was clear that the world they were walking through was not one that would let them pass without a test. They had to be prepared for whatever came next. As they moved deeper into the forest, Jack's thoughts turned back to the settlement. It felt like the only hope they had, but something about it still didn't sit right with him. The invaders weren't just a threat to Elira's people, they were a threat to everything they had left. And if they couldn't find safety in this new world, Jack knew there would be no going back. For now, All he could do was keep moving, keep fighting. For Illyra, for her children, for the family they had become. The unseen enemy, the moon, hung low in the sky, casting a pale, silvery glow over the alien landscape. The night air was cooler now, but the distant sounds of the forest creatures seemed louder in the stillness. Jack's boots crunched lightly. On the gravel path they followed, but the sharp sound didn't seem to belong in this strange, unnerving silence. His mind was racing, thoughts constantly shifting between the road ahead and the unsettling feeling of being watched. He glanced at Illyra, who led them with the quiet determination of someone who had long since given up on fear. Her back was straight, her eyes scanning the dark horizon, always alert. Her children Kale and Leroy had fallen asleep, their small forms nestled close to her, exhaustion finally overtaking them after the long trek through the wilds. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the night had become darker around them. Something's wrong, Jack muttered to himself. His instincts were telling him that danger was near, that they weren't alone in the forest. The constant sense of being hunted hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown stronger. Every rustle of the leaves, every snapping of twigs underfoot, felt like the prelude to something worse. You feel it too. Illyra's voice broke through the quiet, and Jack turned his head, meeting her gaze. Her eyes, sharp and cautious, locked onto his. I felt it since we started moving, Jack said, keeping his voice low. There's something out there, watching us. Illyra nodded, but there was no fear in her expression, only acceptance. She had lived with fear for longer than Jack could imagine. She had witnessed her world crumble, her people wiped out, and yet she was still here, still fighting. But Jack could see it in the way her shoulders tensed, the way her grip tightened on the knife at her side. She knew they weren't alone. We're close now, she said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. The settlement's just ahead, but we have to make it through the woods first. Jack felt a pang of doubt. What if we're walking into a trap? He asked, his mind swirling with questions. They had no way of knowing who lived in the settlement or if they could trust them. The invaders were everywhere, and the thought that they could be walking directly into enemy hands unsettled him. We don't have a choice, Illyra replied simply, though her eyes betrayed the doubt she kept hidden. There's nowhere else. This is our only chance. As they continued walking, Jack's unease deepened. The path was narrow, the trees growing thicker, their twisted branches looming over them like dark, skeletal hands. The wind had picked up again, and with it came the distant sound of something moving through the forest. Jack's ears strained to catch the sound, footsteps, low and purposeful. The movement was deliberate, as if someone or something was shadowing them. Stay close, Illyra whispered, her voice barely audible. She slowed her pace, crouching low as she made her way through the brush. Her children still clutched tightly in her arms. Jack followed her lead, instinctively stepping in her footsteps. Every muscle in his body was tense, ready for whatever was lurking in the shadows. The sounds grew louder, too close now. Jack's hand went to his weapon, his fingers tightening around the handle. The night was alive with movement, the air thick with the promise of danger. And then, without warning, something burst out of the trees, moving faster than Jack could react. Illyra spun, her blade flashing through the air, and Jack instinctively raised his own weapon. But the creature stopped short, its dark eyes locking onto theirs. And for a moment, neither side moved. It was a man, or at least, that's what Jack thought at first. He was tall, his skin dark and weathered, but his face was twisted in a grimace that didn't belong to a human. His eyes were an unnatural shade of yellow, and his teeth, sharp and jagged, glinted in the moonlight. The man, or whatever he was wearing a dark uniform, the insignia barely visible under the dirt and grime. Jack's pulse raced, his hand trembling on his weapon. The stranger had an air of hostility about him, But there was something else too, something Jack couldn't quite place. The man's eyes flicked toward the children, then back to Illyra and Jack, sizing them up. Illyra stood motionless, her hand still on the hilt of her blade. She didn't show fear, but Jack could see the way her jaw clenched, her eyes narrowing. She recognized him. That much was clear. "Who are you?" Jack demanded, his voice firm, though his heart pounded in his chest. The stranger didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced over his shoulder as if listening for something. Jack's senses screamed at him there was something else in the air, something dangerous. "Run," the stranger said suddenly, his voice hoarse. "They're coming." Before Jack could react, the man turned and bolted into the trees, disappearing into the darkness. Illyra didn't hesitate. She grabbed Jack's arm, pulling him forward with surprising strength. "Move," she urged, her voice sharp. "We can't stay here. They'll find us." Jack didn't question her. He followed her lead, pushing through the underbrush as fast as they could manage. His heart raced, not from fear, but from the knowledge that they were being hunted again. Whoever this stranger was, he had been watching them. And now, they were running out of time. They ran, the sound of footsteps behind them growing louder, closer. Jack didn't look back, knowing the danger was too real. Illyra's grip on his arm tightened, her body moving with practiced speed. But Jack could hear it too, the unmistakable sound of pursuit. They weren't alone anymore. The unseen enemy had found them, and this time, there would be no escape without a fight. A moment of hope, the world around them seemed to close in, the dense forest swallowing their every step. Illyra's grip on Jack's arm was firm, her pace never faltering despite the heavy breaths she took in between the hurried strides. Her eyes darted constantly to the shadows, as if the trees themselves were enemies, hiding more dangers than they could possibly see. Jack kept close, his thoughts clouded by what had just happened. The stranger, whoever he was, had warned them, but the warning hadn't come in time to prevent the sound of pursuit from growing closer. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves in the distance sent their hearts into overdrive. The predator wasn't far behind them. "Where are we going?" Jack panted, his voice barely a whisper in the thick, oppressive air. His legs burned, and his mind struggled to focus. The adrenaline was pumping, but even the rush of survival couldn't block out the ache in his bones. "To the settlement," Illyra answered, her voice steady, but Jack could hear the edge of panic beneath the calm exterior. Just a little further. Jack's mind was racing, processing every detail he could. He had seen the stranger's eyes cold, calculating. His warning had been real, but now they were running blindly, pushed further into the wilderness with no way of knowing what awaited them. "Why didn't you say anything about this before?" Jack asked, breathless. The question had been building in his mind since they had encountered the stranger. What's going on with these people? Why would he warn us? Illyra's face softened, and for the first time, Jack saw a flicker of something other than determination and fear in her eyes, something that resembled regret. She didn't answer immediately, eyes fixed on the path ahead. "I didn't want to bring you into this," she said, her voice low. "But now there's no turning back. The settlement isn't just a place of refuge. It's a place where people like me are hunted." Jack stopped in his tracks, his heart skipping a beat. Hunted. He repeated, the word heavy on his tongue. "By who?" "By the invaders," Illyra said, her voice shaking now. "They control everything. They've taken over most of the galaxy. The settlement was supposed to be safe, but ... it's not anymore. There are rebels, fighters who've been resisting them, but they're few and scattered. The invaders are closing in, and there's nowhere else to run." Jack's mind whirled. They had been running toward what they thought was safety, but now it felt like a trap. He looked at Illyra, seeing the weight of everything she had been. Carrying on her shoulders the loss, the fight for survival, the uncertainty that had followed her every step. And now, she was looking to him for help. "We don't have a choice," she said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. "We'll fight them together, if we have to, but we have to get there first. We can't stop now." Jack nodded, the weight of her words settling on him. They were in this together, no matter how dangerous or uncertain the road ahead was. There was no turning back, not for any of them. Without another word, Illyra quickened her pace, and Jack followed. The sounds of pursuit had faded, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being herded, like prey being led toward a trap. They pushed forward through the thick brush, their breaths harsh in the silence of the night. Finally, after what felt like hours, the forest began to thin. The trees became less dense, and the path before them opened up to reveal a faint light. In the distance, the settlement. But it wasn't what Jack had expected. Instead of a bustling town or a hidden refuge, the settlement looked more like a fortress, battered but resilient. The walls were made of rough-hewn stone, and watchtowers stood at every corner, as if the place had been built to withstand constant attacks. The flicker of firelight from the distant campfires cast long shadows across the area. People moved quickly within the walls, their faces shadowed and weary. This was no peaceful haven. This was a place hardened by war and survival. "Is this it?" Jack asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Illyra nodded grimly. "This is the last place left that can offer us some kind of protection. If the invaders come for us, we'll fight. But this is the only place that stands between us and complete annihilation." They approached the gates cautiously, and Jack felt the eyes of the people inside the settlement on them. Every movement was watched, every step scrutinized. It was a world of suspicion, fear, and survival, nothing like what Jack had imagined at. They neared the gate. A tall figure stepped forward from the shadows, blocking their way. His face was weathered, a jagged scar running down one side of his cheek, and his eyes were sharp with the intensity of someone who had seen too many battles. "Illyra," he said, his voice low but firm. "You brought them here." Illyra didn't flinch, but Jack could see the tension in her posture. "They're with me," she said, her voice unwavering. "We need shelter. We need to stay." The man's eyes flicked over to Jack, then back. To Illyra, there was a long pause before he spoke again. "You'll be safe for tonight," he said, his tone softer now. "But in the morning, we'll have to make a decision. We can't afford to keep everyone. The invaders are closing in." With a heavy heart, Jack followed Illyra inside the settlement. The atmosphere was thick with uncertainty, but it was a fleeting moment of hope. They had made it. For now, they were safe. But Jack knew that whatever came next would be the real test. This was no sanctuary. It was a battlefield, and the war wasn't over yet. The final test, the settlement's walls loomed like sentinels, their jagged edges standing against the bleak sky. The flickering lights from within barely softened the oppressive darkness, casting long shadows across the dirt roads. People moved in and out of makeshift homes, their faces tired and hollow. Yet there was something in their eyes, a shared understanding of survival, of fighting against something far greater than themselves. Jack felt the weight of their gaze as he followed Illyra into the heart of the settlement. The air was thick with tension, the kind that comes before a storm. There was no relief here, no real peace. The sense of danger hung over them like a cloud, and every corner they turned seemed to hold the potential for disaster. Illyra, still, holding her children close, walked with purpose, though Jack could see the slight tremble in her hands. She wasn't used to trusting others, not after everything she had lost. Her people, her home, everything was gone, and now she was looking for something to hold on to. Jack wasn't sure what it was that she was searching for: safety, solace, a new home, but he knew one thing for certain: they weren't out of danger yet. The invaders could be here at any moment. The man at the gate, the one who had let them in, had given them refuge for tonight. But Jack knew better than to assume. They were safe. Nothing in this world, or in the universe for that matter, was certain anymore. And as much as Alira had fought to protect her children, there was still one thing she hadn't prepared for: the full force of the enemy, the settlement's leader. A tall woman with steely eyes and a scar running down her neck approached them as they made their way to one of the few intact buildings. Her eyes narrowed as she surveyed Jack and the family, sizing them up as if they were no different from the many others who had come seeking refuge. "We don't take in strays," the woman said bluntly, her voice firm, her posture unyielding. "You bring trouble with you, and I'll have to ask you to leave." Alira's eyes darkened, and Jack could feel the tension rising again. "We're not here to cause trouble," Alira said, her voice calm but firm. "We've been running for too long. We need shelter, protection." The woman stared at her for a long moment before turning her gaze to Jack. "And you? You're just a soldier. Another wandering survivor looking for somewhere to hide." Jack straightened, meeting her gaze. "No, I'm not just a soldier. I'm the one who promised her that I would keep them safe, and I'll do whatever it takes to make sure they stay that way." There was a brief silence, heavy and charged, before the woman's expression softened, just barely. "Promises are nice," she said, her voice losing some of its edge. "But we're at war. There's no room for hope anymore. It's all about survival, and we're the last line of defense." Jack's heart clenched at her words, and for the first time, he truly understood the gravity of their situation. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was a war that had torn everything apart. There were no guarantees here, no safe places. They were all just trying to hold on to something that was slipping away faster than they could grasp. The woman, seeing the doubt in his eyes, stepped aside. "We're all in this together, for now. But when the invaders come, you'll see just how fragile this peace is." Alira, now more than ever, had that same look on her face, the look of someone who had seen it all fall apart and was trying to piece it back together. She took a deep breath and moved past the woman, her children still clutched in her arms. Jack followed closely, unsure of what to expect next. The settlement was nothing like he had imagined: a haven, a sanctuary. It was a battleground, plain and simple. The people here were survivors, hardened and scarred by the wars they'd fought and the losses they'd endured. The walls of this place weren't built for protection from nature. They were built to hold back an enemy that wouldn't stop until everything was destroyed. As Alira led them into one of the small buildings, Jack noticed the absence of comfort. The beds were bare, the floors cold and unwelcoming. The walls were thin, the air stale. This was survival, not living. Alira set the children down on the small mat in the corner of the room, and Jack stood by the door, watching. He wasn't sure what to say, what to do. This place was as much a prison as it was a refuge. They had made it here, yes, but at what cost? What awaited them in the morning? As Jack's thoughts raced, Alira turned to him, her expression softer than it had been in days. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, "for everything." Jack didn't respond right away. Instead, he took a step toward her, his eyes meeting hers. "We're not done yet," he said, his voice low and determined. "Tomorrow, we fight. Together." Alira's lips quirked upward slightly, though the sadness in her eyes remained. "Tomorrow, we survive," she said softly, as if the words were as much a promise as they were a prayer. And with that, Jack knew that the real battle wasn't just for survival. It was for the chance to rebuild, to find hope in the wreckage. They had made it this far, but the world was far from kind. Tomorrow would come with its own challenges, its own dangers. But whatever came next, they would face it as a family. They had nothing left to lose, and for the first time since the crash, Jack felt the weight of his decision settle in his chest. He was here for them now, and he wouldn't leave. Not when the fight was just beginning.